Hey, what is up? Welcome to this episode of the Entrepreneur to Entrepreneur podcast. As always, I'm your host, Brian Lofermento, and it's not often that I introduce guests by just confessing publicly. I love this guest's company name. I love the way that she articulates and messages the stuff that she does. I love the impact that she's so committed to for her clients, and that means that she's an amazing entrepreneur in person that I'm so excited to talk to. So let me introduce you to today's guest. Her name is Joanne Merrick. Joanne offers over 25 years of global experience in helping individuals and organizations thrive. She has delivered transformative leadership programs across 5 continents and 22 countries, combining her expertise in neuroscience with a passion for building management and leadership capabilities. As the founder of, here's me introducing her incredible business name to you, as the founder of The Leadership Recipe, Joanne designs impactful programs that enhance communication, emotional intelligence, and team performance. Her global perspective, shaped by living in Australia, Hong Kong, and now the USA, draws on her leadership roles at major organizations like Deloitte, Amazon, and Juniper Networks. This diverse background fuels her fresh, practical approach to leadership development. Now, not only is she a fellow entrepreneur, but she's also an author, because her debut book, Game On, is Management Your Best Career Play. Joanne empowers readers to make informed decisions about stepping into management. And when it comes to the work that she does with The Leadership Recipe, I love her mission because she loves unleashing the extraordinary within you. So for all of us as entrepreneurs, this is a topic that we may want to ignore, but we certainly can't ignore, and we're all going to get challenged and invited to grow by Joanne today. So I'm not going to say anything else. Let's dive straight into my interview with Joanne Merrick. All right, Joanne, I am so very excited that you're here with us today. First things first, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm just jiving here to that music, Brian.
Trust me. Joanne, listeners don't know. I have a little view of our guests at all times. I can always see their camera, and I saw you bump into our intro tunes.
I'm jiving.
I love that you're in the mood. Let's kick things off by you taking us beyond the bio. Who's Joanne? How'd you start doing all these cool things?
Oh, wow. I think it comes from an inner passion, honestly, that was really started about 20-something years ago when I did my psychology degree. And, you know, then I was working at Deloitte at the time and just having a great time working and chatting and training and just being with a group of great people. And that's what I thrive to do. And that's what I thrive to create in organizations as well.
Yes, I love that. I would imagine the psychology background gives you such an interesting perspective because it's a soft skill. Obviously, I'm not even sure I'm crazy about that term, soft skills, but when we talk about leadership, it almost feels like this ethereal thing. It's like, what is it really that we're talking about? How do you begin to make sense of the scope of the work that you do?
Oh, so true. You know, like soft skills, there's no such thing as soft skills. They're hard skills. They're hard skills to learn and to grow and develop. You know, they almost take a lifetime or a career to really put in place. But those soft skills, as we call them, are very much a part of every manager or leader's world. They're skills that they rely on every single day. I talk about, you know, leaders and managers needing to create a toolkit of skills, so to speak, that they can call upon at any given time, under any given circumstance, usually with not a lot of preparation time. So they need to have a really well-defined toolkit of skills to put into practice at any given time as needed. But it's not easy. And, you know, I truly believe that, you know, the role of a manager is underestimated in terms of its impact, not only on the manager themselves, but obviously on the people that report to them and the companies that they work for. I don't think that we're talking enough about management skills or how to be a great manager in general. And I want to bring this to the forefront because, you know, even the title manager is outdated. I mean, it dates back to probably the Industrial Revolution. And funnily enough, Brian, I was having a conversation with an executive in a tech company quite a few years ago now about that exact topic, that the title manager was just not reflective of what we were teaching our employees at the time. So he decided to play along with me. He said, okay, Joanne, what would you change it to? if you could. And I thought, oh, this is fun. Okay. Communicator. And then I thought, no, empowerer. That's what managers do. They empower people. And can you imagine an organization full of empowerers or senior empowerers, Brian? Like, how cool would that be as a title? I think it would be a much more interesting and also much better reflection of what the actual role itself entails.
Yeah, I love that. Joanne, surround me with all the empowerers. I want all of them because that's the truth. And I think it's really cool because obviously as entrepreneurs, we are in certain ways our own empowerers, but we have to be empowerers in literally all of the ways. Whether we have employees or not, we have to be empowerers with our clients. We have to be empowerers with our vendors to empower them to do a great job on behalf of our businesses and on behalf of ourselves. And so empowerment is obviously at the root of all of this. Joanne, there's so many mechanisms and skills through which we can do that. Introduce us to some of those, because I'm going to get really picky about these skills that you speak of, because skill suggests that we can improve them and we can learn them. But walk us through what those ways that we can empower others are first.
Absolutely. Well, I see there as being kind of four major elements I talk about in the book of being a great manager. The first one is taking on a strategic perspective, because I think when you move from an individual contributor role, everything is pretty much about you, the work you do, the results you get, how you perform. To being a manager, it's not about you anymore. It's actually all about everybody else. It is to some degree about the work that you do, because if you're a manager, you're not only managing people, you obviously got your own initiatives, projects, etc. that you'll be working on. So taking on a strategic, broader perspective is something that's really important. The other one is communication skills. Communication is just one of those human skills, I guess, that is just so unique to who we are and what we do. Another one is team performance. Obviously you need to, or team leadership, you need to lead your team. You need to lead them through challenging, difficult times. You need to celebrate with them. You need to manage their performance. You need to set goals. You need to unleash, their potential. And the final one is around judgment. How to prioritize the work that you and everyone else is doing, how to make decisions, and how to problem solve. Are typically all of that. But in each of those four segments, there's a lot of skills that make up each of those. So there's a lot more detail to go into here. And I think a lot of people underestimate the number of skills that managers need to learn and engage in, but they are indeed learnable. There's a lot of misconceptions out there about management, and I also talk about that in the book too, but one of them is that management is an innate skill and something that not necessarily can't be learned. That is, you couldn't get any further from the truth there. And again, funny story, I was actually running a management and leadership training program when I was at, I won't mention the company, but it was one of the large organizations that I worked with. And we're in the middle of this training program, and one of the participants stood up. She had a very strong opinion about the fact that management could not be learned, that it was an innate skill. And Brian, I found that to be completely ironic, given that we were in the middle of a management training program. But we had quite an engaging conversation about it. And, obviously you respect everybody's opinion, but my opinion is that these skills can definitely be learned, and they need to be practiced, and practiced for a career. The old adage, practice makes perfect. Amateurs practice to get things right, but professionals, they still practice, and that's to keep from getting things wrong. So that's the trick with all of these skills, is to be introduced to them, to practice them through lifelong learning, and doing so will bring out the best in you as a manager and a leader, and obviously will bring out the best in the people that work with you.
Yeah, I love the way you articulate that, Joanne, especially when you talk about practice. I'll tell you where my head goes is soccer is such a big part of my childhood. And growing up, I always played on very competitive teams. And everybody who's ever played a sport has heard that phrase of you practice how you play. And so with that in mind, when hearing you talk about practice with regards to leadership, I think about how our coaches always tried to, and had various degrees of success, to get us to imagine that what we're doing here on the practice field isn't just for practice. We have to put ourselves in the shoes of a real life scenario. We have to pretend and get ourselves to believe that it's a match day scenario. And so with that in mind, it's not practice to just go through the motions. It's not a worksheet that we can fill out in a seminar, Joanne. I want you to really share with listeners how we can actually practice in a way that delivers results, a way that is useful rather than merely just motion.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think, to be honest, to set context up front, it takes humility. It takes a little bit of humility to understand that I am learning a new skill, and maybe as I am learning that new skill, I'm not going to be perfect at it immediately. And I need to be open to feedback, to hear from other people what I'm doing well and what I can be doing differently in order to get even better at that skill. So with that comes, famous Carol Dweck's work of a growth mindset. That means having a growth mindset yourself about yourself and understanding that you're doing your best and you're open to learning and changing and doing things even better moving forward based on other people's perceptions of how you're going. So that's the way I would start to think about it. And then I would pick a couple of skills. In my book, I actually have a diagnostic. It's not a science-based diagnostic, but it is a diagnostic tool that folks can use to kind of understand, first of all, what skills they enjoy engaging in, and second of all, based on those skills, what their current level of capability is, whether it's, beginner, intermediate, advanced, whatever. So I encourage them to kind of start thinking about what might be 2 or 3 skills that I can work on over the next couple of weeks that will take me from a beginner level to an advanced level, or an advanced level to, or an intermediate level rather, beginner to intermediate, and then obviously intermediate to advanced level on that skill. And then pick 2 or 3 things that you can do in order to grow and develop in that skill. So a quick AI tool, search can give you some really good tips on how to do that, particularly if you put into the AI tool a little bit of context about your current role and how you might grow and develop in that current role. Obviously, you can work with a coach or a mentor. Your manager might be a great person to work with there. A trusted peer, someone who you engage with and is ready to give you open, honest feedback, knowing that feedback is something that's going to help you grow, develop, and improve over time. So, an example of that, like if you want to build your communication skills, you might mention that to your manager and then put your hand up to lead a team meeting moving forward so that your manager's not doing it, or, whatever. You might do that with your manager and with your team. And in doing so, you might get clear on what are the objectives of this meeting, what would success look like or feel like as it results to this meeting, what are a couple of things that I want to make sure that myself and my team get out of this meeting, and then what am I going to do to follow up afterwards. So that's just like a basic structure for running a team meeting. But it's something that anybody at an individual contributor level, so someone who is maybe thinking about becoming a manager in the future, can start working on now, volunteering for those extracurricular, so to speak, activities that will give them an opportunity to practice under a safe environment. I also encourage folks to identify some of these skills and even practice them in their home life. So are you running a family meeting? Are you planning a family event? Who are you engaging with in a family context to bring about, whatever it is that you're working on. I think the key here is to just pick a couple of skills. You don't want to do all of them at once, but just pick a couple of skills that are going to work for you moving forward, finding opportunities to practice them, getting feedback from folks around you on how you can do even better, and then continue to grow and develop that way.
Yeah, Joanne, when I hear you use that verb of pick pick two of those skills that you want to get better at, what I really hear is that level of intentionality. Is that all too often in life, in professional careers, in relationships, we think that things will naturally evolve over time because that's the way that the universe works, but it's that level of intentionality that brings about tangible changes. And so with that in mind, I always kind of hear, when we talk about leadership, I hear a little bit of conflicting advice about pick those things that are your weaknesses and make those better versus double down on your strengths. So Joanne, when it comes to us picking what it is that we should be working on, where do you fall in that debate of picking on those weaknesses versus making our strengths even more amplified?
It's picking what's going to get you to where you want to get to. I'm a huge advocate of doing what you love and loving what you do. And I find that we have a lot more, we love doing a lot more what's related around our strengths than maybe what our weaknesses or areas of improvement are. But there are some roles that require certain skills that maybe we're not too fond of. And maybe it means for our future success that we need to gain a level of familiarity with them, even if we don't love them. So I am an advocate for playing to your strengths. I think that makes a lot more sense. But I think we need to be real about the future roles that we want to work on, that we're not maybe going to love every single aspect of them. If we can make a majority of our time doing things that we love, obviously that would be ideal. But I think we also need to be practical about, our day-to-day, finding ways to do whatever we can do in order to be successful, and hopefully that is playing around our strengths. But sometimes, we've all got something to learn. We've all got something to work on. And surprisingly too, Brian, sometimes I truly believe we don't know where our true strengths might be until we're open to discovering ourselves a little bit more. I'm going to age myself here, but imagine if Elton John never started to twinkle on the ivories of the piano. What if John Lennon, and I heard his wonderful song Imagine the other day, I guess that's why he comes to mind. What if he never picked up a guitar? That their brilliance would never have maybe had the opportunity to shine. And maybe when they first started playing the piano or, playing the guitar, they didn't really like it that much, but they wanted to obviously make something of themselves, and found an avenue to do that. Maybe they had great days where they thought, oh yeah, this is really cool, and maybe they had days where they thought, oh, I just want to give up. But I think their resilience and perseverance is also key. When you've identified what is it that I want to do, what is the impact that I want to have on this world, and how am I going to get there? And I think it's a bit of give and take on both sides.
Yeah, and hearing you talk about that within the context of Elton John or anyone who's quote unquote made it in any industry, you brought up resilience. You went straight there, and that's something that when people ask me what are the ingredients to piggyback on your recipe, what are the ingredients to entrepreneurial success? Resilience has to be in that mix. And then where I start going is I broaden it and I say, well, so much of it just comes down to mindset. And Joanne, I love the fact that neuroscience plays into the lens in which you do your work and the lens in which you help people. Because for me, I majored in economics, and I really love behavioral economics because a lot of it focuses on psychology and the way that the mind works, and especially biases, recency bias, selection bias, all those different things. Talk to me about how that lens really shapes and is kind of your secret power when it comes to helping people understand these things.
Interesting. I was introduced to neuroscience and the concept of neuroscience in leadership not long after I moved to the United States back in 2011 from Hong Kong. I'd lived there for 3.5 years before living in Australia. And this concept of neuroscience, like I had been introduced to great works of, the likes of Stephen Covey from the leadership, Ken Blanchard, other people. And it was always what those famous people, great minds, what they brought to the table from a management and leadership perspective was always really interesting. Great books, etc. Neuroscience came to the fore, and all of a sudden, a lot of what they were talking about or had been talking about for the last 10, 20 years and beyond was now provable in science by looking at the human brain and seeing the impact that doing certain activities or thinking certain ways was actually having on the physiological structure of the brain. So, wow, like bam, fascinating stuff from a leadership development perspective. So that's what pushed me into doing my postgrad through the Middlesex University in the UK on the topic, and I loved every single second of it. One thing I learned, a couple of things I got out of that. The main one was, as you call it, a lens. Once you've learned anything, you can't not look at a situational circumstance through the lens of your education, right? So that was important. And then I started to, really apply in the corporate sense a lot of what the science was teaching us. And that was starting to get really interesting when we got the opportunity to do that. And I can give you an example. One of the significant areas that are on impacts on the brain is this sense of having autonomy. So we've all heard of like managers that micromanage us, and micromanagement is one of the worst things that managers can do, because what they do in micromanaging their team is they take away a person's sense of choice and control. So, and I'd seen a lot of micromanagers in my time, a lot of managers who really wanted to control situations, circumstances, people, and not only were they getting frustrated with their team, but their team was obviously getting frustrated with them. So something was not working around this whole concept of micromanagement. And I remember being in a lecture. It was something like, because I was traveling so much at the time, I think my lecture in UK time was like 3 a.m. or 3 a.m. in the morning in Japan. It was like some crazy time. And we were talking in this lecture about autonomy and the importance for having a sense of autonomy on the human brain. And one of the gentlemen that I was studying with was living in the UK, and he told a story about getting home from work, and he had a 4 or 5 year old son, and as he entered his home, his son was playing on the staircase, as there's often a lot of staircases like right in the front door of those homes in the UK from my experience. So he greeted his son and then went to the kitchen and helped his wife prepare dinner. So it's dinner time, and he calls out to his son, who's still playing on the stairs, come to the dinner table for dinner. The son was having so much fun playing on the staircase that he said, "No, Dad, I'm not going to come to the dinner table tonight to eat dinner. You bring my dinner to me here on the stairs." Well, this was not acceptable to this gentleman, because it was their family tradition to eat dinner at the dinner table. So he'd been studying this work, or doing this work on the importance of autonomy, choice and control. And rather than just tell his son to get to that dinner table and eat his dinner, he took a moment, he took a step back, and he said, "Okay, you need to eat your dinner at the dinner table," right? So he set clear expectations, which is really important as well. He said, "But I'll tell you what, you don't have to sit at your normal seat when you eat your dinner. You can sit at any seat at the table. That's your choice." The kid was interested. Why? Because his dad was automatically giving him a little bit of choice, a little bit of control over his circumstance. But the dad didn't stop there. He doubled down and he said, "And I'll tell you what, you don't have to only choose where you sit. You can also choose where daddy sits and where mummy sits at the table." That kid was at that dinner table so quickly. Why? Because he had a sense of control over his situation. He had choices to make, and from those choices, the control and the sense of autonomy came shining through. So how do I refer that from a management and leadership development perspective? As a manager, sometimes it doesn't matter how things get done. It just matters that they get done. And if managers can be a little bit more creative sometimes, and rather than tell their direct reports what to do, ask their direct reports what might be the best way that we can get this done. First, hear from their direct reports, and then maybe their direct reports have actually got a better idea than what the manager might have had in the first place, or the manager can then share their perspective and they can have a conversation around the best way of getting things done. So neuroscience changed my life, gave me a completely new lens through which I could engage managers and leaders also from a training perspective as well, and how I can maybe encourage them to think a little bit differently about how they engage with and manage their team.
Yeah, Joanne, I love that real life story that you gave us. The example of the dad getting the son to come to the table and giving that control and power. What I hear and what really resonates from my own personal experiences, even just creating that environment for someone else to step into. Joanne, I'll share this with you, is that all the way back, it was probably my early 20s. I was taking my soccer coaching licenses, and I remember the instructor, I played my whole life. And so I thought, because I'm a good player, by default, I'm going to be a good coach. Of course, it's absolutely not true. And so the instructor that day challenged me with coming up with a practice plan that teaches kids how to dribble a soccer ball. And so I, of course, went a little analytical, and I said, well, you use the inside of your foot and you push it, and sometimes use the outside of your foot. And the instructor stopped me and he said, look, you'll never be able to explain to somebody how to do it. Create an environment that forces them to dribble. And I said, well, how do I create an environment that forces them to dribble? They're just going to kick the ball as far as they can. They're kids. That's what kids do with a ball. And he said, how about we have a practice drill where you can only pass backwards. And I thought to myself, you can only pass backwards. Well, what's going to happen there? And he said, the kids themselves will realize that the only way forward is to dribble because we can only pass backwards. And he called that style guided discovery. He said, you don't need to teach them how to dribble. You need to guide them to the point where they discover that. Joanne, this is a little soccer example, and I'm excited for you to connect the dots. Yeah, for both me and for listeners. How do we implement that in our businesses? How do we implement that as leaders? Because to your point about we don't care how it gets done, we care that it does get done successfully. What's the business and the management equivalent of that soccer coaching example?
Yeah, I think that's a great example. I don't know. I think a lot happens in team meetings. To take the team analogy one step further there, I think managers need to create the space, like what your coach did, create the space for brilliance, create the space for conversation, create the space for collaboration. And in doing so, I find that managers are really surprised by what their team can come up with. The challenge there, if managers don't do that, they end up having a number of direct reports who just rely on their manager to give them the answers or solve their problems or tell them what to do. And, I'm not sure about anyone else, Brian, but I know that I definitely want to be able to take a vacation in the future. And managers that don't encourage, enable, empower their teams will never really get to have a vacation because they'll always need to be at their team's beck and call, so to speak, to actually get anything done. So there's something in this for managers to do as well, but it doesn't happen by accident. And I find that, even the most structured managers who have a to-do list or have an agenda for every meeting that they're working on, maybe make an agenda point to have fun for 20 minutes, and maybe put to their team, what could we do to have fun together? Or, a get to know you activity for 10 minutes out of a 50-minute team meeting. Put it on the agenda, because sometimes if you don't make the time for something, then it just won't happen.
Yeah, I love that. Joanne, it's so true. You make me think of one of our internal meetings the other day where we ended up talking about the moon landing and how that impacted our families. And one of our team members, Laura, talked about her grandmother's memories from that. My mom's family had moved to the United States in 1969, and it plays into what did it have to do with business and how did AI make sense of that meeting transcript? It didn't, but it really furthered the way that we created that environment where we can all share things, where we can basically say our own thoughts, our own perspectives, regardless of how it plays into the way that others have to think. So when we talk about culture, Joanne, I feel like everyone tries to put labels on it, but the actual practices that you're talking about today, this is what yields a culture. And I'm so appreciative of the way that you go about your work. I told you before we hit record that time would fly by, but I want to squeeze 2 more questions in with you. And so the first question, it's something that I had highlighted about your messaging, because I love your business brand. I love the name of your company. But what I really love is your mission. And quite simply, I love that sentence that says, at the Leadership Recipe, we're about unleashing the extraordinary within you. Joanne, when I imagine the work, the deep and meaningful work that you do with your clients, I would imagine that in order to do that, step 1 is to get them to see and believe the extraordinary within them. What does that look like? How do you bring that out of the people that you work with?
I think it's a great question. To me, it starts with asking lots and lots of questions, because, the Leadership Recipe, the thinking behind that was there are literally millions of recipes out there. And I can give some basics of some of the things that I believe might go into making a great manager or a great leader. But everybody is unique. Everybody has personal aspects, personal styles that they bring to the table. So I find you actually learn a lot more about yourself when you are asked questions and being given an opportunity to kind of really think through the answers to those questions. So it starts with me asking a lot of questions of my clients, not only so I get an opportunity to understand them and their uniqueness, maybe their strengths, but more their uniqueness of what they bring to the table. And what I find really fascinating is just in them answering those questions, you literally see little light bulbs going off. You see you see smiles on people's faces when they really start to understand, believe, think a little bit differently, see themselves in a new light, get more confidence and clarity in their thinking as well. It's truly delightful to see, and that's why I talk about, are you hungry? Looking for a unique leadership recipe that I believe we all uniquely bring to the table, and it starts with asking lots of questions and giving an opportunity for people to kind of really think through their answers, and then me reflecting back to them what I think I heard. And then, I think I'm a great listener, but, there's, even when I speak and someone reflects back to me what I have said, sometimes they've reflected back perfectly, and it is what I said, but it's not what I meant. And so that means that I'm encouraged to think about myself much more deeply and reflectively by maybe asking myself and answering questions that I'd never really thought I would. And doing so just kind of peels back the layers of the uniqueness that a person brings to the table and creates an inner level of understanding, appreciation, and dare I say it, self-love. I don't know. Definitely self-awareness. No doubt about that.
Yes, I love that, Joanne. I would argue from the outside looking in, just having looked at your work as much as I have, that it's not just about those questions, but Joanne, you obviously have that ability to create that environment where those questions actually have the space to leave that impact. And so I really appreciate the way that you go about your work. And speaking of questions, the only question that I ask that's the same in every single episode is this final one, and that is, what's your best piece of advice for listeners? Knowing that we're being listened to by both entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs at all different stages of their own growth journeys, and also knowing that you're not just the subject matter expert that you are, but you're also one of us. You're also a fellow entrepreneur. So with that hat on, what's the one piece of advice you want to leave listeners with today?
Find a way to love what you do and do what you love. Even if it's not immediately available to, or even if you're not truly immediately aware of it, find something in what you're doing that you love and just continue to do more and more of that, or as much of that as is possible. And I can give you a really quick example. In another lifetime, I was actually a singer. I was so much of a singer that I had a manager. I mean, I'm going back a long time, and that manager would really be supportive in helping me find gigs and singing opportunities. And it was a great time in my life. Obviously, I wasn't meant to be a international singer. I think I was truly mediocre at best, but I went on and did my psychology degree and started doing a lot of management and leadership training. And I would bring song into the classroom. You know, if I got it up, if some lyrics to a song came to mind, I would just burst into song in the middle of the classroom. Well, that got people's attention, and it was fun. You know, sometimes we would even be kind of clicking and, jiving along with whatever was going on. Quite an unusual circumstance in a corporate training program. But I became known for that. I had a bit of a reputation for that. So as much as I wasn't meant to be a singer per se, I found a way to bring singing into another love. And doing so enabled me to continue to do what I love and love what I do, but also create a level of uniqueness with who I was and how I wanted to stand out in my profession.
Yes, I love that advice for our listeners. And Joanne, I love the way that it's manifested in your work, in what it is that you do. That's the beauty of being an entrepreneur, is that we get to inject ourselves and our passions and our hobbies into the way that we operate. So huge kudos to you, Joanne. I also so appreciate all the good stuff that you're putting into the world, including your book. Huge congrats to you for that. I know how much work goes into that. So Joanne, you owe our listeners some links. Where the heck can they go to learn more about all your great work and find that book of yours?
Fantastic. I've got a sample of the book here with lots of flags in it from my perspective, but it's called Game On, Is Management Your Best Career Play? And it's really a guide or a playbook for next-gen leaders to help them make a decision to become a manager rather than maybe fall into a management role like so many people do. They can always email me at joanne@theleadershiprecipe.com. I would love to hear from you, and also obviously check out my website, which is theleadershiprecipe.com.
Yes, and listeners, you already know the drill. We're making it as easy as possible for you to find those links down below in the show notes, no matter where it is that you're tuning into today's episode. Super simple to remember. Joanne, I love the fact that you got that domain name, theleadershiprecipe.com. You'll find a link to her book there as well, so do not be shy in reaching out. Most people are. This is such an easy way for you to stand out with incredible entrepreneurs and guests like Joanne, is be one of the few that proactively reaches out and continues the conversation. So Joanne, on behalf of myself and all the listeners worldwide, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me. What fun.